Okay, I think we'll get started. Welcome to the April 6th, 2021 edition of the Philanthropy Club, Tainted Money, Ethics in Philanthropy. Uh, I'm Rich Gage. I'm the Senior Development Officer at Lawrence Hall. I want to thank Forefront for hosting us yet again. And special thanks to Key Montgomery and Lisa Mae Simpson, who make this all possible. I also want to shout out to Gus Wilhelmi, our founder, who is now in Fergus Falls, Minnesota. I'm not making that up. And he may be watching or experiencing this, he may not. He's the founder of the Philanthropy Club, and I owe a lot of thanks to him for making this what it is. I also want to thank the panelists who I will be introducing shortly, and also my co-moderator, Jennifer Holmes, who's the Assistant Director, Corporate and Foundation Relationships for Rush University Medical Center. So just briefly about Zoom protocol, which you probably are all very familiar with. Feel free to use the chat function to identify yourself and the organization that you're affiliated with if you so choose. And if you have questions, use the Q&A function because Jennifer will get to those throughout the session. So before I turn things over to the panelists, I just want to read briefly, or actually summarize briefly, some recent stories in the news, which I think are particularly pertinent to our topic. These are all things that I read about first from the Chronicle of Philanthropy. This won't take more than a couple minutes. Okay, the first, museums, universities, and other institutions would be able to shed the Sackler name without repercussions under a proposal from 23 state attorneys general. The officials want to amend a proposed bankruptcy plan for OxyContin maker Purdue Pharma to release nonprofits from naming obligations and gift agreements with the company's owners, the Sackler family, without fear of litigation or demands to return the money. Among the institutions with the Sackler name on the wall is the New York's Metropolitan Museum of Art. Private messages among the family that have recently become public, quote, showed how the family tried to leverage their years of philanthropy to solicit positive PR from museums during the scandal, unquote. Okay, next story. Billionaire investment manager Leon Black is under increasing pressure to quit New York's Museum of Modern Art's board over his decades-long relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. Trustees will meet next week in part to decide whether to push Black out shortly after he announced his resignation from the $455 billion with a B Apollo Global Management Fund. And then the last story, just brief summary, it's like a title, divestment activists allege Harvard's fossil fuel investments violate state law in complaint to state attorney general. So these are all recent pieces of information which I think are pertinent. So our panelists, we have a great group. I will introduce them and provide their title, and then we'll talk very briefly about how this is going to work. Our first panelist is Annika Mitchell, will and trusts and probate attorney from Mitchell Law Firm, LLC. She'll be talking about this issue from a donor and nonprofit legal perspective. Then Tiffany Williams, who's the founder and principal of T.J. Marie Consulting, will be talking about this issue from a nonprofit fundraising consultant perspective. And then Darius Hillman, executive director of the Chicago State Foundation, is going to be talking about this issue from a nonprofit fundraising and institutional assets perspective. So I think we've got a lot of interesting points of view that are that are represented. So what we've asked each panelist to do is to talk for about 10 minutes, talk just briefly about their background, and then we've asked them a couple questions. Does your organization have an ethics and fundraising policy? If so, what is it? And how did it come about? Do you think it's strong enough? If not, how would you amend it? And then we've also asked them to provide one concrete example of how they recently had to deal with this issue from their particular perspective. Once the panelists are done, my colleague Jennifer will manage the Q&A section. And as we've gotten a number of questions prior to today, which the panelists are going to be responding to. We really appreciate your sending those on. And I will now turn things over to Annika.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Annika Mitchell with the Mitchell Law Firm. I just wanted to share a little bit about the law firm and the types of clients that I work with, and that might help provide a little bit of context of what I'm talking about when I'm working with potential donors on the estate planning side. I'm a solo attorney. I founded my firm in 2013. And as Rich said, I am focused on estate planning and probate, as well as some small business work. With respect to the estate planning and probate side, it is a little bit of a niche for me in that I do not work with high net worth individuals. I do not do sophisticated tax planning. My clients primarily are tax exempt. So their estates will not be subject to either the state of Illinois estate taxes or the federal estate taxes. I do have clients. I would say most of my clients have assets that are about $1 million or under. I do have a couple of clients that would fall in the 5 million and under category, but those 5 million and under are rare for me. I would say that with respect to charitable planning in estate planning documents, before 2016, I would say that about 5% of my clients included charitable organizations in their estate plan. And when I say in their estate plan, I'm speaking about naming a charitable organization within their will or their trust, or identifying a charitable organization on their beneficiary designation form. Over the last 4 to 5 years, though, that number has increased to, I would say, about 25 to 30%. And I've seen a pretty steady increase with the clients that I've been working with. In terms of who is making those gifts in their estate planning documents, I would say that the majority of those clients are single clients or clients that may be together, whether married or in a committed relationship, and they do not have children. In those cases, I have seen more of my clients that meet that demographic have charitable organizations listed as a primary beneficiary in one of their estate planning documents. Married clients or clients with children, usually they are leaving their estates to the other of them. And then if both spouses have passed away, then typically they want to identify their children as the contingent beneficiaries. But in those cases where there are children named as beneficiaries, charitable organizations would come in as a contingent beneficiary. So within that 25 to 30% of the clients that I'm working with, we do have, I think, a pretty significant number that are identifying charitable organizations. In all of my estate planning documents, which would be either a will or a trust, I do contain a provision that's called the worst case scenario planning. And apologies for being so grim this early in the morning, but the job of the attorney is to think about those worst case scenarios. And essentially what this provision would cover, it's an unlikely scenario, but it is a possible scenario. What would happen to the estate or the trust assets if there were no beneficiaries alive to inherit, or maybe beneficiaries have disclaimed for some reason? What happens to those funds that are left over? And the default provision is essentially leaving the estate to heirs at law, meaning family member, next of kin, any family that survives you. I would say that most of my clients, when I present that default provision and they're recognizing that they have provided for their loved ones in, other means, or they're relieved, or they feel a level of comfort that their primary gifts are taken care of, they are then much more willing to identify a charitable organization as a recipient of that worst case scenario planning. So we do have conversations like that in the estate planning process. But as an attorney, I don't drive those conversations with respect to, are you going to make a charitable gift? I can't bring my wishes to a client meeting. I have to have that client tell me what they want, and then we work together to make sure that their wishes are realized. Quickly on the probate side, or the administration side of things, and when I'm talking about administrative side of things, that's when a person has passed away and they may have a will, or they might have a trust. If they have those documents in place and they have named a charitable organization, and that charity is a taker, so to speak, meaning a gift will be going to them, the Illinois Attorney General needs to be involved. They provide a level of oversight on making sure that the charitable organization receives their gift. And so I frankly do appreciate that oversight, because it can kind of help me keep, the family or the administrator in line, so to speak. Keep in mind that, when I'm working with clients that have gone through something like this, a death of a parent, a death of a loved one, it's a very difficult time. And so not everyone is on their best behavior. And so when I say having the oversight from the Attorney General to keep people in line, it just keeps everybody focused. There's less fighting, or the possibility of something unlawful going on. But so while I do appreciate that oversight, it also can increase the overall attorney's fees. So sometimes when I'm working with the client, I do present that as a possibility, and then we talk about a more direct way to make a gift to the charitable organization. And usually that's through beneficiary designation forms on a particular asset, retirement accounts or stock accounts. In terms of answering the questions, what are my policies that drive my organization? It would be the rules of professional conduct, anything that the Illinois Supreme Court has set in place for attorneys with respect to how to regulate attorneys, making sure that they are doing their best for their clients. And as an attorney in private practice, my obligation is to be an advocate for the client. So while I might not necessarily agree with how they're leaving their estate, whether that is, disinheriting a child, or maybe turning a gift into something of a punishment for someone else, or leaving it to an organization, a charitable organization that I personally wouldn't donate to, that's not something that I can comment on or guide a client away from. I can just provide them with the pros and cons of both sides of that.
Okay, Tiffany.
Hi. Hi, everybody. Good morning. Thanks so much for having me. So I'm Tiffany Williams. I have been a fundraising and nonprofit management consultant for more than 10 years. My firm, TJ Marie Consulting, exists to strengthen nonprofits and support the people who power them. So we are based in Chicago, and our consultants have partnered with nonprofits all over the United States, helping our partners secure more than $1 billion in philanthropic revenue for their missions and their causes. So we are incredibly excited about the work that our partners are doing and engaged in. And I think this is such an incredible topic to be discussing this morning. So our services include feasibility studies and in advance of like major capital campaigns or major gift efforts. We also do campaign management and board development and fundraising strategy and search, and the list goes on and on. So really kind of all things nonprofit consulting. So to answer the two questions, as a fundraising consultant, we abide by the Code of Ethical Standards adopted in 1964 by AFP, the Association of Fundraising Professionals. So that code of ethics really kind of guides the rules by which we perform our duties and partner with organizations. So it's really easy to find, but just to give an overview, it talks about compensation, or like how consultants are compensated for their work, right? So if you have ever spoken with a nonprofit consultant, or you're on the call and you are a nonprofit consultant, sometimes you'll hear an organization say, can we pay you just like a percentage of what you help raise, right? And that's against the code of ethics, right? For a number of reasons. We know that, a lot of times these rules are in place because something has happened that has prompted, them to be on the book. So, it's really, fee for service. So also about reporting money, right? So I'm a business, I was a business major in school. And so we learned all about like accounting and auditing and how easy it is to kind of cook the books and make numbers look a different way. So it talks about, our ethics regarding reporting money. And then also just conflicts of interest, right? Like, should you be raising money for an organization that you might be involved with in a different way? And so some code around that as well. So our firm does abide by the Code of Ethical Standards, and most nonprofits and fundraising professionals do. As a business owner, we have an ethics policy that's internal to our organization, and so we abide by our ethics policy. It's very much so in line with the Code of Ethical Standards, but also have it has some elements in there that's just specific to how we'd like to show up for our clients and how we'd like to show up for our communities and in the world. In the ways in which we serve. And then finally, I have an app. So I have a totally different company, and it's a mobile application. And it's a donation and donor engagement app called Gively. Well, Gively, because it accepts money from individuals to then transfer over to nonprofit organizations, there's a whole other set of rules and regulations that are dictated by the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission. So there is a whole other, standard and rule by which we must apply our business practices there as well. So those are, just to answer the question, do we have a policy? Yes, we have a policy. Our clients have policies, and we try to abide by all of them, or we do, or we'd be in big trouble. And then finally, the question of, is there a specific instance where you maybe had to say no to a client or a customer or a donor. So because we are not a nonprofit organizations, we don't have donors, but obviously our clients are nonprofits. So I can't speak on any one of their specific instances where they maybe, said no or turned down a gift. But I think there are lots of, and I know we'll get to them, but lots of examples where we can kind of talk about how that process works, right? So just to give an example, our platform is only for organizations that are legally 501c3 organizations in the United States. So they have to have that designation. So yes, we have had to turn down organizations that aren't quite there yet, right? Because we want to make sure that everybody who's donating on the platform knows that when they give, they are giving, and that their philanthropic investments will go to organizations that have been vetted by our process to ensure that they are in good legal standing. So that's one example. I know we're going to get to a lot of this further on, but the way that I approach, and this is, Tiffany making recommendations to nonprofit organizations and clients. I don't, as Annika said, I don't, get to make those decisions, but I do, it's my job to put all of the cards on the tables for our clients and allow them to choose, how they like to accept or decline donations from donors. And so we'll talk about that, but just it's based on, the donors, the brand, and the mission, and how those things are in balance, and how an organization would like to, measure that in their accepting of gifts. So I know we'll talk a lot about that, and I'm excited to jump in.
Great. Okay, Darius.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Darius Holman, Executive Director of Chicago State Foundation. Chicago State Foundation is a standalone 501c3. I like to think of us as the chief time, talent, and treasure partner for Chicago State University. I have been in nonprofit, specifically fund development and marketing and nonprofit management I used to go, oh, I'm almost a decade. And then it was like, oh, it's almost 2 decades. And now I don't count anymore. Just know I've been doing this for a good while because I love it. Here's an interesting piece of information I think will explain kind of the approach I take as the leader of the foundation as it relates to ethics and transparency. Chicago State University has a long history, 153 years, but this is an institution, and you'll hear me talking very transparent, institution that maybe 3-4 years ago, when I was at the Chicago Urban League, seeing on the news that it was 2 days away from closing. And it was the top news story every night. There was tons going on. In 2015, June 2015, the foundation, the iteration of it prior to this, was a part of institutional advancement at the university. So it was that really connected relationship. The Chicago State University Board of Trustees took a vote in their June meeting to disband the foundation effective immediately and to relaunch it as a standalone 501c3, which is this. So I say that to say, as we talk about ethics and conversations that not only need to be had with external partners, but internal stakeholders as well, we have a few things, because I think it's more than just a policy. It is a state of deep-rooted, from the bottom up, in the dash moment, having these conversations openly. So last year, and it took about 8 months to do it, I've been with the organization 2 years. So over the last year, we flew in our investment team from California, sat down, walked them through, said, this is where we are. We want you to be a partner in this conversation. But as we prepare for the next 100 years of support to this university, we came up with a revised investment policy. It is clear, it is transparent, it sets clear tone and terms, but it also includes a socially responsible investment policy. And that socially responsible investment policy also crosses over into our work with foundations and corporations. And and again, that which gets measured gets done. So as for the organization, we also have performance standards that cut into integrity, how we are to comport ourselves. And that is a part of your measurement, a part of your performance measurement. They are embedded in performance, much like they are embedded in the performance of our investment managers. So we are constantly having this conversation. Once a quarter, the foundation's fantastic deputy director, we do sessions where we look at our strategic plan and we see all of those things embedded and we hold ourselves accountable to that. And I find, you can do all of this. It's never going to be perfect. There's going to be one donor that is one step where you go one step further. This would have been not a good relationship. So you're constantly, I think, as fundraisers, fund developers, relationship leaders, you're constantly tapping into what my grandmother gave me. She used to call it her gut. I call it the spirit of discernment. So you're using all these tools. It's not one thing. It's not, ooh, if you get a policy, you're going to be okay. It is using all these things together. And I think more importantly, on top of that, for me, it is being fearless. And what helps to be fearless as it relates to ethics, both internal and external, is touching your mission. I spend almost every Friday in mentoring sessions with our student scholars, our first year student scholars in our RISE Academy. And when I walk out of that, it is very easy for me to say to donors, you will not exploit. What you won't do today is exploit these student scholars or this institution serving this incredible, important need. Whereas the dual pandemics may have caused stress in different ways, for me, it has been a fantastically clarifying event. I am very clear as a leader on what matters. And I think the other question that we have to ask ourselves as leaders in this space, what are you willing to risk for what you believe and what the organization agreed that they would believe before that money came all shiny bright? So that's number one. I think I answered question number one. So let me get question number two, which is a good segue. Recently, we returned money to a funder, to a donor after a series of conversations. But those conversations were all about us digging into the work, having conversation with partners, in some instances, really looking at all of our agreements and making sure that we're having transparent, proactive conversations. Not, ooh, if we have this conversation, we may get the money back. No, let's have these transparent conversations. This is who the university is under the leadership of the incredible president and their team. We are looking at these things. Here is how we want to, can you share those agreements, the policy? I'm sorry, I was reading Deidre's question and I should stay focused. We'll talk, Deidre. But ultimately that conversation became, I think the best step is for us to return that money. Absolutely okay. That's fine. That's absolutely okay. We had a conversation with, I remember previously, not in that far distant past, a funding partner coming into the room. My CEO took the meeting with me. And when the meeting was over, as she and I were walking out, she looked at me, she went, we're not taking that, right? I'm like, no, we're not, for these reasons. And then she and I huddled the team that was in the room with us. In the middle of, there was a kind of a open working pit between her space and the marketing and development space where I was. And we stood there with our team and walked through, this is why, this is why. What we also realized, there was a gap in that funder's history in our records. After that meeting, we understood why that gap happened. This time we documented it. So it's not about just when I'm here, it is about pushing this policy for the privilege of time that I have here, that when the next folks come, they go, okay, we can make decisions, but this is why that relationship happened, or this is why that change occurred. So those are, I don't want to go over my 10 minutes. I know we got a lot to cover, but I think it is more than just written policy. Absolutely start there, but it is each of us who are in this space walking the talk. And really ultimately, and that will change for you. It's different for me now at 52 than it was at 40 or even 30. What am I willing to risk? And me, I'm willing to walk away. but my life is different than your life, different than someone else. So there's no right or wrong. But I think before it becomes making decisions, you should have that conversation with yourself and then set that example for your team and your organization.
All right, Jennifer, you're on.
Well, thank you so much, Annika, Tiffany, and Darius. You all can take a breather before we jump into questions. So breathe, exhale. Okay, so thank you all so much this morning. That was a really great way to get our conversation started. For those who were here in the beginning, Rich shared that we got a robust list of questions. When everyone registered, they were able to share questions about this topic. And I mean, the questions were amazing. And so we will answer some of those questions, but Rich and I want this to be a conversation, not a talking heads experience. So please use the Q&A to drop any questions in that you'd like to pose to the panelists. We do have a couple of questions that have already been posted by Dr. Singstack over at the Chicago Defender. And then we'll jump into some of the questions that were sent to us by folks who registered for the session. So I want to get started with the second question that Dr. Singstack asked. And so here's the question. If a nonprofit is considering accepting money from a donor, whether it's an organization or an individual, are there formal processes, documents, etc., the nonprofit can use to assist in confirming legitimacy, integrity, ethics of that specific donor, regardless to whether it's an individual or an organization? So basically the question is if we're thinking about accepting money from somebody, how do we vet them? How do we vet them? So is there something written? Is there, and I think Darius, you talked about this just a second ago about the spirit of discernment, the gut, and having processes, but that's Dr. Singstack's question. So what are you all's perspectives on that?
Well, we do prospect research. So, again, being back in the day where I'm old enough to remember where we could smoke at our desk and we would use the phone book and the encyclopedia. The Google is magical, but there are systems, Foundation Directory, Grant Station, relationship science. Any partner, before we enter a relationship, we do prospect research. That means you learn everything about them, what their giving is like, what their board looks like, what their employee, diversity looks like. So again, part of our job, people think fund development is really simple. That is a key. What Dr. Singstack just talked about is a key piece of what we do. Garbage in, garbage out. So we do not engage with a partner unless we do research. If that's an individual, there's Nexus Lexis. You do wealth screening. You can see where they give their money. Anything that is public information, the development team should have systems in place to find that. And then we create the report. Here's what we've learned about that potential partner, because we assume they're doing the same thing about us. Because I received questions from donors going, can we see your certificate of good standing? Answer this for me. I need a copy of your 990s. That is a mutual relationship. That's a mutual partnership because, again, you are the advocate, not only for the institutions you represent, but more importantly, and I said it like I meant it, more importantly, the clients that they serve. So I would say prospect research is everything. We should assume they're doing it on us as well and actually encourage it.
Tiffany or Annika, did you all want to respond to that question? You don't have to, because we do have some other questions.
I think Darius answered it very well. I tend to take a slightly different take on accepting money. So I'll wait till one of those questions come up. But I'll say this, you know, if you as an organization decide that you would like to vet every dollar that comes in, or if there's like a cutoff, right? Because are you vetting $25 gifts? Are you vetting $1,000 partnerships? Are you vetting $1 million? I think that consistency and clarity are key here, right? So what you do for one, you must do for all. And so, you know, certainly, you know, donor research, but, you know, donor research doesn't necessarily tell you about scam. That's Google. Google will be helpful to tell you about any scandals that you may not know of. But certainly, you know, the research is out there if you decide that vetting each partner is.
And Tiffany, if I can jump in, you know, look, you can do all these things
and still.
And still, but guess what else I learned from my grandmother? I get to come back to you after and go, hey, this is what I've learned. So, and to your earlier point, Tiffany, a 25 or 50 donor, I'm talking about major gifts, high 5, 6, 7 figure gifts, because with that is a certain level of expectation of how you promote that partnership and relationship. So that's really about who you are getting in bed with publicly. And there's an expectation they are going to use the power of your brand to promote their goodwill and their giving. So Tiffany, that's a good point. The other point is, again, just like with the partner I just talked about, we can break up should the world change. It's not consistent, things change as long as you are about integrity, as long as we're about integrity, but that is a mutual partnership. And that is an ebb and flow. So just because you were of integrity today, no one, to Rich's earlier point, Jeffrey Epstein wasn't an issue 6 months ago or 2 years ago. It is now. As the world changes, we must continue to change. It's not static.
Okay, thank you, Tiffany and Darius. So here's another question from Kelly Kleiman. She says, there's no such thing as virgin money. Why should we care where the money comes from as long as it's going to a good cause? So let's tackle that one. That's a really, really great question.
Girl.
we are taking this work and we're taking this work. We're taking this money and we know that we're using it for programs to support people in the community. So they don't know where it comes from. So what what difference does it make? What do you all say about that? What's your perspectives on that one?
All right, so I guess this is
come on, Tiffany, here we go.
Kelly. All right, so you know, as a fundraiser, I'm always going to err on the side of you know, approaching this from a standpoint of like not like what are the reasons why we shouldn't take the money. For me, it's what are the reasons why we should take the money. And so I was listening to a podcast a couple of days ago, and it was really good. And there was a man on there by the name of Ian McQuillan, and he is a director of a fundraising think tank called Roger. And so I'm telling you who he is because I'm going to steal what he said because I agree. So he said there are 4 reasons why nonprofits tend to reject money. Mission misalignment. So think like a cigarette company giving money to a cancer society or research society. Total misalignment there, right? Future consequence. So an organization saying, if we take this money, there is the risk that we will lose other money, that other donors will, you know, not give, and then there is a consequence that has an adverse effect on the organization or the mission. Ill-gotten gains, so just, you know, money from El Chapo, right? Like we know that the money was not, you know, received in a way that, or it's not gotten in a way that is legal, right? And so we certainly don't want to go there. And then the 4th one is morals and values, okay? The first 3 are consequential, right? So mission misalignment or mission creep. So that is also like a donor saying, hey, I'm going to give you $1 million to go build a pool. And you're like, we don't do pools. We have an after school program for kids and it has nothing to do with, you know, aquatics or whatever, right? So the first 3 are consequential to the mission. And the last one is highly subjective. And so that is where I come down in terms of like, how do you as an organization or as a people or as fundraisers, as nonprofit leaders, make the determination that what is your value and moral should also be that of someone else's. So my recommendation is to say, vet, start out with an approach that all money is good money, but then vet against those other three, because those are consequential to the mission. And nonprofits do everything regarding the mission, right? You do a strategic plan, you start out with the mission. What is our mission? What is our vision, right? And so everything is centered around that. When you go to talk to donors and you're like, this is our mission, this is our impact, this is where we're going, right? And so everything is around that. But when it comes to, this topic of conversation, somehow the mission and the brand get mixed up in terms of priority. And so I encourage people to think about, how the mission is centered and how the brand is centered. And so if donors are being centered, or the brand or the image is being centered instead of the mission, I caution that for obvious reasons, but then also, how then do you measure that, right? So is it, my organization, a $25,000 gift to Harvard is literally, wouldn't even like pass through somebody's desk, right? Because their endowment is so large. A $25,000 gift to a new startup is consequential, right? Or what do we say about gifts that are made from, families with generations and generations of money, but back, 100 years ago, the way they got that money was through something that we would today consider, unethical or immoral. So, to wrap it up, I say measure against those four things. And I think once you get to that last one, the idea of morals and values, it gets really sticky in terms of how you consistently apply those rules to every gift that comes in. And then does it change if you recognize the donor or if you don't recognize them? What if the gift is anonymous? So if you say, we'll take it if it's anonymous, but we won't if it's not anonymous, then you center and brand, right? And so if that's the, so I think it's an interesting conversation to have, but I like the way he set it up with three that are consequential. And can you measure this gift against those three things and let one of those be the reasons versus something that's subjective and arbitrary and cannot be easily applied throughout.
Thank you so much, Tiffany, for that. If you have a second, Tiffany, if you could drop those four in the chat, so that folks can write those down, because if an organization, especially if you're a smaller shop, if you don't have an ethics policy, that those four elements might be something to jumpstart a conversation with your team and with your board. It's just it could be a springboard. So so Tiffany, if you could drop those, that would be awesome. Annika, I'd like to pull you into the question, the conversation, and just ask you if you have a story about ethics that you can share with us, that you wish people knew about. If you have something that you could share with us that you've had to navigate around ethics.
Sure. I want to apologize in advance if you're hearing some background noise. I'm having some emergency work done on my roof. So there's a lot of pounding that I did not intend, and I just wanted to apologize for that. But with respect to, an issue that came up, I was working with a woman who had recently been divorced. She had, an existing estate plan that was in line with her former husband's estate plan. They had a lot of charitable bequests in their estate plan collectively. When she got divorced, the first thing she wanted to do was update her estate plan, which is very common following a divorce or any significant life change. And we were going through the bequests in her existing documents. And I was asked, did you want to keep this one? Do you have documentation on this one? What are these gifts? Do you still want to move forward with them? And much to my surprise, although the client was very much in agreement with the mission of this particular charitable organization, literally with a swipe of a pen, she removed this organization and the $1 million gift along with it, because she did not like the leadership of the charitable organization. Now, I don't know the backstory behind it, but I think it probably speaks to, making sure that your donors have a relationship, that there is something that can withstand a divorce or a life change. But she didn't decrease that amount from the 1 million. She just completely removed it. So, certainly circumstances can change, but I do think that it is interesting that, even if there is a significant mission that is pulling at a donor's heartstrings, the leadership or other circumstances impacting that nonprofit may play a role in whether a donor decides to continue giving or not.
Thank you so much, Annika. Tiffany, I'm going to bounce back to you, and then Darius, get ready. So Tiffany, want to ask you this question. This is a question from a fundraiser, from the heart of a fundraiser for sure.
Okay.
So we know that when, for fundraising, it's significant for us to develop a strategy, right? A strategy that's aligned with our mission and who we will seek funding from and how we will seek that funding. And so when we think about, approaching a partner and we find out that there may be some misalignment between the partner and the nonprofit's values, what are some considerations that you think a nonprofit should to think about? If they develop their fundraising strategy, they're ready to go, and then they get in front of a partner, and while they're in the midst of the conversation, they find out, whoa, this prospect has some issues and some missions and some practices and some values that don't necessarily align with our organization. What are some things that you would recommend a fundraiser or a nonprofit think about? And then Darius, I'm coming to you.
Yeah, so when I first started my business, it was, I learned this concept of go to the door that's open, right? Like if the door, why try to build a window from the wall to get through when there are doors, on the house and you can walk through those? And that's really, that was how I thought about potential clients, right? Like either I'm going to have to convince you that a fundraising consultant is what you need, or you're already looking for a fundraising consultant and you're clear on what you need one for, and you're ready and the board has approved, resources for that. And it's an easier thing to do. So I think this question is about whether or not you'd like to, if the ball is in your court as a nonprofit leader, if, this is about you pursuing a donor, right? So if you're saying okay, I'm researching and I'm going to pursue this donor, why not pursue a donor that has affinity and has some alignment, right? So don't try to create an issue for yourself. However, a lot of the conversations that we're having around, money and gifts are because the donor, has reached out and given to an organization. Then the organization has to decide on the back end whether or not it's going to accept it or not. So I would say, in line with what I mentioned before, either way, whether the organization is pursuing a donor or the donor is pursuing, is this mission misalignment something that's going to adversely impact the organization, right? And then it's easy. You just say we're not building pools, and if that's where you want your money to go, that's not where we're going, right? Or does this person actively engage in something that would cause harm to our mission, right? So completely, an adverse effect on the mission itself, right? And those two things could be potentially easy to answer. And then you just say, this is not something we'll continue to pursue. So we think about donors real quick. There is affinity, capacity, and then access, right? So you may say, okay, we have access to this donor. Somebody can pick up the phone and call them, right? This person has capacity, right? We've done the research, we've looked all in Wealth Engine, and we know that they have capacity to give, and they've given to other things, right? The affinity piece. Do they have an affinity for our organization or our mission, right? And so if there is a direct misalignment there, then that piece doesn't fit. You really kind of need all three if you're going to be pursuing a donor, right? So I hope that answers the question.
It totally does. That is so very helpful. I want to, Darius, I want to come to you to ask a question that is very sensitive. And it's about fundraisers specifically who are on the front lines, who are actually working, talking to the individuals, talking to the families, talking to the corporations, talking to the foundations. And while they're having those conversations, they find out that there is some misalignment. And they decide, the fundraiser says, I don't know about us taking this gift. I'm not so sure about this. My gut is telling me no. My discernment is telling me no. But then they go back and they have a conversation with the leadership of their organization, and the leadership says, we're absolutely taking that money. What do you do then? What are your thoughts about that, Darius?
Oh, I have so many. Here's the thing. We talk about all these things. At the end of the day, you try to make the concerns as unemotional as possible. So it would be looking at this, looking at past giving, looking at reputation, looking at news, looking at this feels like ambulance chasing because it's $1 million that's going to bring $2 million in new expenses because we don't do what they're paying for. So there are multiple ways here. So I want to try to clear my thoughts. There are some instances where I go, everything else is okay. My gut says, based on what I've heard, and the board comes back to me and go, well, I think it's fine. Let's keep an eye on it. Okay. There are other instances where there is clear misalignment. There is clear, this is a branding exploitative sort of thing versus commitment to mission. There is also, you want donors to have partnership, but when you cross the line into, you will do this with the money, this, and this, and we will control this, and we will control everything. You have to leave some room for the organization to be the expert at what they do, and the donor making an investment in that. So I've had both instances where I've had to sit in the room with the board and go, okay, we'll keep an eye on that. Just wanted to bring this up. Part of my job as the executive director or the chief development officer is to bring that to your attention. There have been other instances where I go, this for me is a personal deal breaker. And again, that's why I go, where do you, especially dual pandemics has really given me clarity. I have an accountability, and that's personal. At some point, this becomes personal for me. So yours is going to be different, where I have to go, and I've had these conversations because you want to have them before it happens. What is the line for me that I go, well, I can't be a part of it. I'll walk away. And you want to be careful not to use that haphazardly because one day somebody's going to go, okay, bye-bye, thanks for coming. But so I think all those conversations, the conversation with your board, as we set our work, to Tiffany's earlier point, the centering piece for us, we can look at what your board looks like. We can look at what your diversity practices look like. We can look at what so I'm less concerned about the morals of you being a Republican or whatever religion, and more concerned about how that impacts your organization's commitment or lack thereof to access and equity, to promotion of women, people of color, LGBTQ community. So all of those things. So by the time we get to the point where you are right now, Jennifer, and the board goes, but that's $1 million, we're taking it. Then now I have to make a personal decision because that plays in this as well. And that's going to be different for everyone. But I would say to you, start the conversations from the moment you walk into the organization. And what you will find is that it becomes less traumatic. I am confident right now, and I've had stress tests with our board, we are aligned because we've been having the conversations from the beginning. And we have put it in writing and we infuse it into the work, and we're constantly talking about it. And I know I can go back to the board right now. Yeah, and there have been instances where it has been, for these reasons, I'm recommending we do not pursue this. And again, they just check it up against all the notes we've already talked about and they go, agree, absolutely agree. So I think that the worst case, the doomsday scenario, is less likely if you do all the front end work and make this a part of the conversation, every single conversation with your board, do trainings, bring in folks like Tiffany to do those trainings, do those supports, and have those conversations. So when you get to this moment, it's less of a, it's gonna be less of a stress show than you think, because we all want what's best for the mission, what's best for the organization. So they're usually easier decisions than not, but the board is looking for you to give them clarity around it.
Thank you, Darius. That's really helpful. You know, that this particular question came from someone that registered, the one that I just asked you, Darius. And so it makes me think about the mission of the Philanthropy Club. And the mission of the Philanthropy Club of Chicago is actually to level the playing field between smaller nonprofits and those that are larger and more resourced and more well-networked. And so when I think about the smaller shops, which is where I came from, you know, where I started my development career before I went to Rush, is $1,000 or a $10,000 gift can actually be transformational if we're a smaller shop. And so, you know, are we in a position to really be picky? And so I really appreciate you saying that as fundraisers that we have those conversations at the beginning with our board and really start thinking about what's our walk away? What is it when we decide this is where we walk away? This is what we accept, this is why, this is what we don't accept, and this is why. You know, what are our ethics and what's in place? And that's an internal conversation. And Annika, I'd like to pose a question for you. As a legal professional, you're working with clients, you're working with their families. And so what are some issues that you faced or some situations you faced that were really sticky? And can you share how you navigated those as a legal professional?
Sure. There's two that come to mind. One is pretty specific, and then another one is just generally speaking with respect to estate planning. So the more specific scenario, I was working with an elderly widower, and he had an existing estate plan, and I was working with him just to update it. And one of the pieces of an estate plan was leaving a gift to this religious organization, and the requirement was extremely specific. And so what he was doing was leaving a part of his insurance proceeds to this religious organization. And what was a little sticky for me was that this was a man of very limited means, and he was in his 90s, keeping a life insurance policy and paying those premiums on a monthly basis, with the expectation that this a portion of the life insurance proceeds would then benefit the organization. You know, certainly when I initially sit down with the client, I have an obligation to make sure that the client has capacity to undertake estate planning process. Do they have the proper capacity? And the capacity for a client in the estate planning setting is a lower standard than a typical contract. On the estate planning side, a person needs to understand what they own. They need to understand the impact of what they're doing, the impact of their gifts, and what it means. So clearly this client had capacity. He knew what he was doing. He knew the reason why. He knew exactly what was in his estate. But for me, it was a little sticky in that it just didn't make sense financially. He could have taken the life insurance proceeds, the life insurance policy payments, and made a gift of that, instead of having a 90-some-year-old man keep up a life insurance policy. To me, that just seemed it was a little sticky. But again, I did not want to interfere with what this client felt was his obligation to the religious organization. He had consented to have his son sit in on the estate planning meetings, and his son was also supportive of it. So it was one of those situations where I didn't necessarily feel comfortable. It didn't make sense from a financial standpoint, but this gentleman felt strongly about it, and he had the support of his family. So really, as an attorney, there wasn't anything for me to do. But with respect to a larger comment on estate planning, I have countless estate planning horror stories that people typically don't realize that they're horror stories until the client's gone. This area of law is very tricky. Words have a huge impact on what is actually legal, what's valid. And when you have gifts, whether they're to individuals or charitable organizations, if there is any way to just involve an attorney in those conversations, I will say this, attorneys typically have a reputation for making things more complicated. I get that, and expensive. But in the long run, if there's a way to make sure that these gifts are going to be valid gifts, that the wording is taken care of appropriately, that people have given thought to contingency planning. As a nonprofit who might be benefiting from those gifts, it might be worth that investment. I read somewhere that there is, with the boomers aging and passing on, there is a tremendous amount of wealth that is being transferred. And in contrast to that scenario, less than 40% of Americans have estate plan documents in place. So if you as a nonprofit are looking to have a piece of that wealth transfer, the best advice that I can give is make this as easy as possible for your potential donors. And really, even smaller nonprofits can benefit from having some type of section on their website that says, make a gift, include us in your estate plan documents. Just the general comment that I would make is, yes, keep it easy for your donors. But if you can engage an estate planning attorney just to help make sure that those gifts are getting to the right place. I have, when working with clients, I have had, after we've had conversations about the initial estate plan documents, I'll reach out to the nonprofits and ask them, do you have specific wording? Is it okay if this language is in the document? Do you have any requirements about you being named in the estate planning documents? And only very few of the nonprofits request a copy of the estate plan documents. Certainly that would require client consent. But that would be a really helpful request for a nonprofit to make, just so that they can, in fact, review those documents and make sure that they are valid. And if you are in a role within the nonprofit, consider having relationships with estate planning attorneys, just so you can, bounce some ideas off of them. Have, 2 or 3 that you go to. Just, you don't have to formalize that relationship or, make business go to those estate planning attorneys, but just have someone to bounce those ideas off of and make sure that those documents are in fact valid. I think it would be a wise time investment just to ensure that this complicated area of law is meeting everybody's needs.
Thank you so much, Annika. Tiffany, I'm going to come to you, and Darius, get ready. I got a heated one for you. Okay. So, Tiffany, an organization has received funds from a donor.
Yes.
They've accepted the funds, they've deposited into their account, they are running the programs, and they're in the middle of the programs, maybe getting ready to do a progress report. And then they find out something heinous has happened on the end of that donor. But they already got the money, they've already deposited, it's already gone to the program. Now what? We find out something, what do we do now as an organization?
All
Well,
right.
don't knock your notebook off the table, but what do you think, Tiffany?
Do that first. All right. So I'm gonna say, is this, it's like everything has to be like balanced and measured with what the organization, as Darius said, like set out in the beginning, right? So you've already got the money, you've already started putting the programs together and in place. Now you got to say, what is the consequence of either of these two actions? If we give the money back, then one thing, somebody's not going to get paid, some program is not going to happen, some kid is not going to have whatever that you set out to do for them, some building isn't going to get built that is desperately needed, all of those things, right? Is it worth for the organization giving it back to save what? The brand? Or is it one of these other things that keeping the gift will have an adverse future consequence? And if you can't point to that as being the reason, I'm gonna say keep the money. And let me also say this, because I think that when we have these conversations about tainted money, or for whatever someone has a definition of what that is, for whatever reason, what would the beneficiaries say? Like, where would their opinion lie in this conversation? Beneficiaries, these programs and these missions impact somebody or some animal or some environment, but usually somebody. And if they are not, part of this conversation and this dialogue, then again, and somebody asked the question, like, what's the difference between the brand and the mission? Then again, are we centering the brand for whatever reason, versus the mission or the beneficiaries or the people who would be impacted by that? So it is my personal opinion, again, that you keep the money. However, even if you choose not to, for any of those other reasons or any of the reasons that you set out for in the beginning, just know that then becomes your precedent, to use a legal term, Annika. That then becomes your precedent, right? So every time you accept money, now you've got to know that you have given this money back. Are you going to have to give the next money back? Are you going to have to give, money back, years from now? And then what constitutes having to make that decision? What constitutes making the decision to give the money back, right? So Tekashi 6ix9ine, the rapper who gave the money to the children's organization, is a huge story. They gave the money back, and so it was $100,000 or something. So anyway, they decided to give the money back, right? And so he is a celebrity. So we know that people will know about that gift. But again, I dare say, what say ye of the people for whom that gift would not be front page news? And if the issue is morals and values, then it shouldn't matter, right? Whether or not it's a celebrity versus whether or not it's just a wealthy person. How many people who benefited greatly from the travesty that was a 2008 economic recession are still out giving money and have their names on the sides of buildings, right? So issue of conviction, or issue of celebrity, or issue of size of gift, right? So if he were to give $1,000, we don't know, maybe he gave $1,000 2 years ago, nobody said anything about that, right? But because it was a big gift. So I'm just saying, I'm gonna err on the side of, does it meet one of the other criteria, right? You can pretty much always justify keeping the money is going toward these programs. So we've already, that, but at the end of the day, it sets the precedent. So now you've got to equally apply that across all other future gifts. And if you don't have a written policy about how you measure morals and values, which is very subjective and hard to do, right? How long ago? Where does Jay-Z, can Jay-Z give $1 million to your organization? It's like, yeah, why not? He was rapping about being a drug dealer 20 years ago, So I just think it's a slippery slope. You have to be very, very careful. And I think you have to be consistent and clear across the board. Keep the money, whoever asked the question.
Yeah, thank you, Tiffany. We always want to keep the money. And obviously there's some considerations around that. Darius, I want to get to another question here. A few times this morning, you've talked about the dual pandemic, right? And I'm sure we've all heard you say that. So my question is, there is an attendee that's asked a question about anti-Semitism. Mm-hmm. And what do we do when we find out that a donor harbors those type of attitudes, whether it's anti-Semitism, homophobia, racism, sexism, and so forth, xenophobia? What do we do when we find that out? If we didn't know it up front, obviously, and we've decided to go to the table and have conversations with this prospective donor, or considering a gift, or we've already accepted it. We're obviously talking about COVID, but then there's a whole nother pandemic out there that we're facing and we're dealing with as a nation.
Yeah.
And what are we doing there?
Yeah. Look, this is imperfect and imprecise, but part of the expectation is that when you hire me as a leader, there is some level of I'm bringing all of me to the table. So to your question, anti-Semitism, xenophobia, all of it, I can look here about our commitment to equity, access, and respect and self-agency and go, that's not a moral issue, that is a mission issue for us. That is a no thank you, no sir. And so again, they're going to be grays, but I think ultimately, when you lay out these things and have conversations, it becomes less gray. It also, so as far as I'm concerned, and again, all these things are playing at once, and it's hard to balance them. It's your personal belief. It is me personally as Darius Darnell Hillman, raised on the east side of Detroit. Here's a line: I'm not going to work for any place that does this. And I got to be willing to pick up my things and walk away. There is Darius Hillman, the executive director of Chicago State Foundation, that has a fantastic board. And part of my accountability to them is to empower them with this information so that when this comes up, they can literally go, oh no, that's line 1, 2, and 3 of our socially responsible partnership. So no. So all of those things I think play. And I've been on calls with funding partners, and it's a different conversation with an 87-year-old European funding partner, but it's still the same foundation. It is respect. If your money does not come with a semblance of respect for the work and the people we serve, then I've got to resist the urge to do panic. There's a difference between urgency and panic. And it is a constant, and you got to check your gut, you got to check your written policy, you got to check with your board, your leadership team, your staff. This should be an open uncomfortable but ongoing internal conversation. So you know, before you walk in here with the crisis, you already know where the organization stands on it. But there are some things for me, and I've been on calls this past year, and I've said things to funding partners I wouldn't have said even a year ago. But the time for the gray and the time for that is over. We are at, again, with dual pandemics in, clearly we've not been doing something right collectively. So we're going to try some different things like honesty. We're going to try some different things like, here is what Chicago State is about. If it is not student-centered, look, again, 78% of our students are Black and brown, 61% are first gen. What is a pandemic for a U of C student or my alma mater, University of Michigan, is absolutely different for Chicago State. So again, all of those things, strange as they may seem for me, have been silver linings because there is no lack of clarity. So all these things support that structure and managing, but the hardest part would be me, my stomach for it. Well, I'm good. I got, so I think that ultimately you may not win, but ultimately I think as fundraisers, as folks in this space, and one of our chief accountabilities is to be advocates. I don't think all money is good money, but to Tiffany's point, we need money. So I want to be very clear. The default position is no, we're not taking your money. The default position is yes, let's see if this can work. But is at any point a no comes up, you can have 45 pros, but all I need is that one significant con. I have to have the courage, the fearlessness, based on all the conversation, to say that something else is coming, moving from scarcity to faith and abundance, that the right partner will come. Did I answer that question, Jennifer?
You did, Daria.
I felt that was in my spirit a little bit.
I feel like passing the collection plate.
Okay.
You did a great job.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
At this point, Rich, I am going to turn it back over to you because I think we're at a point of final comments from our panelists, and then we'll do our announcements and we'll bless everyone with a good day. So I'll turn it back over to you, Rich.
Okay, that's great. This has been very eye-opening and entertaining, and that's a good combination. So I know, yeah, we are, as Jennifer's mentioned, we're coming to the end of our session. So if each of you, I don't know, could sum up maybe a parting kind of comment based on what you've heard, that would be great. And I will start with Annika.
Sure. First, I just wanted to say thank you to Jennifer, to Rich, to Key at Philanthropy Club, and then also Tiffany and Darius. It is an absolute pleasure serving on this panel with you. So thank you. I have learned so much. In terms of parting words, I think for me, it is to keep the estate planning portion, keep it simple. Try to engage your potential donors to make those gifts. I did read, and I can go back and find a quote and post it a little bit later, but I did read that if you take a look at some of the nonprofit donations that come in as bequests, so through a will or a trust or a beneficiary designation form, in many cases, excuse me, and this is particularly true with my client base who are not uber wealthy, in many cases, those gifts are the first gift or first donation that someone is making. So you might not be necessarily cultivating your existing donor list to make an estate plan donation. You might be getting someone who has never donated to you before, but your gift is coming to you through their estate plan documents. So if you're able to create that channel for estate plan giving, I would highly recommend it. And then if you're going to do that, try to keep it as simple as possible. To Tiffany's point and to Darius, have a process. It is so much easier to have a process and kind of alter if needed than it is to not have anything in place. And if anyone has questions, I'm happy to field them with respect to estate planning.
Great. So Tiffany?
I echo Annika's sentiment. Thank you so much for having me here. It has been a fun morning. Hats off to my fellow panelists and the host as well. So my parting words would just be, I am glad we are wrestling with these conversations, right? The fact that we are having them and that so many questions came in, and I hate we didn't get to all of them, but hit us up on LinkedIn or something. But the fact that we are having these conversations speaks to our collective, our sector's collective, need and desire to do this right. As Darius said, something's gone wrong, right? So if that is the case, then these conversations and the interest in these conversations and the engagement in these conversations means that there is a desire to do right and a desire to do things in the morally and ethical way that we know we should. So thank you to everybody who is a participant and who engaged in this, who sent in the questions. So my parting words, consistency, clarity, and be brave in whatever way your organization decides to engage in community, because that's why we exist. We exist to create and be the change we want to see in whatever way that our missions, bring us to doing that and making that a reality. So thanks again for joining, and thanks for having me.
Thanks, Tiffany. Okay, Darius.
Woo, the doors of the church are open. All right.
Sorry,
everything.
I'm the granddaughter of a Baptist.
I felt it, okay. Because I was like, there's a cadence, yes. I know it when I feel it.
From Mississippi. So there
All right now. Yes. This has been fantastic. And to what Annika and Tiffany said, thank you to the two of you. Fantastic. I love these conversations with other bright folks who challenge my thinking, who know who care about this as much as I do. We're in a unique space, the work we do. Everything that everyone has said so far, I would add to that, decide, if you aren't, think about your legacy. Because the other good thing about dual pandemics, I say to folks all the time, we're either going to get this right or better, or the rapture's coming. I have to be prepared for either. So I'm leaning toward the getting it better. So that makes it easier to challenge myself to have this conversation, because I don't want us to get back here. I want something different, different challenges, but I don't want us to get here again. So what am I going to do in this space, in this role, in this organization, to challenge myself, to bring my leadership to the forefront? And how am I going to be fearless about that? And to Tiffany's point, be consistent about that. It's got to matter. And I think that's what I keep challenging myself. I've worked in corporate before. And no offense to those who do, I have many friends who work there. They're wonderful people. I like them. But I work in public trust for a reason. So I'm going to fully lean into that. I'm going to fully lean into that work. I'm going to do the due diligence. I'm going to take it as a privilege that I'm in this space and I get to bring processes and documentation and lead the conversation. So this organization of talented leaders and incredible board members, that I give them the tools, the support, and the thought partnership to make the best decisions as it relates to time, treasure, and talent for the university as possible. I won't win every fight. I don't need to. My responsibility is to be the bringer, the convener of those thoughts, those conversations, those things. And if I do that, to Tiffany's point, and to Annika's point, I'm making it better. I'm making it different. It's just raising the level of how I take that very seriously. That is part of the privilege of me getting to do this job at work.
Great, that's awesome. I know that I think Key probably asked if you panelists would mind having your contact information shared. I assume you won't have a problem with that. Hearing no nays, I think that's a joint yay. I also want to let you know that there will be a recording available of this session, I think according to Key, by Friday. So look for that. And then also just to plug the next Phi Club session, which is on Tuesday, May 4th, that has the title Reimagining Planned Giving After COVID, which is pretty interesting. So I want to thank everybody for listening to us. I want to thank our panelists who are great, my co-moderator, Jennifer, who's awesome. And we'll hope to see you somewhere, sometime, maybe in person before too long. So everybody have a great day, and we'll see you later.